The morning light streamed through the towering windows of the White House press office, casting long golden streaks over Karoline Leavitt's desk. The room, always a flurry of activity, was momentarily silent as she leaned back in her chair, staring at the crisp white envelope that had just been delivered to her. A federal summons. Her manicured fingers traced the embossed seal of the U.S. District Court, Washington, D.C., before she carefully slit it open with a letter opener. The paper inside was stiff, formal, and as she scanned the contents, a slow smirk curved her lips. She was being sued. The reason? Defending a group of students expelled from university for the simple act of prayer. Karoline exhaled sharply, shaking her head. A dirty trick, a desperate move, a thinly veiled attempt to silence her. Across the desk, her assistant, Michael Carter, watched her reaction carefully. "Bad news?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Karoline let the paper drop onto her desk with an audible slap. "Not bad, just predictable." Michael picked up the summons, eyes scanning the text, his brows furrowed. "They're really suing you over this?" "This is Washington, Michael," Karoline said, rising from her seat, adjusting the sleeve of her perfectly tailored navy blazer. "They don't attack you for breaking the law. They attack you for threatening their control." Michael sighed, placing the summons back on her desk. "It's political. They know you're a problem for them." Karoline nodded, pacing slightly, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Of course it was political. Ever since she had become press secretary, she had been a lightning rod for controversy, unapologetic, unwavering, and unwilling to play by the establishment's rules. That made her dangerous. But this was different. They weren't just trying to smear her reputation. They were trying to drag her into a legal battle, one that could tie her up in court, weaken her position, and make her hesitate before speaking out again. If that was their plan, they had seriously underestimated her. She reached for her phone, dialing a direct line. After 2 rings, a voice answered. "Karoline." "Mr. President," she said, her voice cool but firm, "I just received a federal summons." A brief pause, then, "For what?" "For defending a group of students who got expelled for praying on campus." A low chuckle echoed through the receiver. "So they've decided to make a move." "Looks that way," she said. "I assume you already have a statement." "In mind, I trust you to handle it," President Trump replied. "But Karoline, make no mistake, they want to make an example out of you. You prepared for this?" Karoline's lips curled into a smirk. "Sir, they should be asking if they're prepared for me." The line went silent for a moment, then Trump chuckled. "That's my girl." She hung up, placing her phone on the desk before turning back to Michael. "Set up a meeting with legal," she instructed. "I want every angle covered before this circus begins." Michael nodded, but hesitated. "Karoline, are you sure about this? This could get ugly." She met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Michael, if they wanted me to back down, they should have picked a weaker target." With that, she grabbed the summons, folded it neatly and slid it into her briefcase. Let them come. She was more than ready. Karoline Leavitt stepped out of the sleek black SUV, her sharp heels clicking against the concrete as she approached the entrance of the federal courthouse. The air was thick with anticipation, reporters swarming the steps like vultures sensing a fresh kill. Flashes erupted, microphones shoved forward. "Miss Leavitt, do you have a statement? Are you worried about this case? Is this political persecution?" Karoline barely glanced at them, her signature-composed smirk in place as she strode forward, her navy blazer immaculate, the small silver cross on her collar gleaming under the overcast D.C. sky. She wasn't here to entertain the press. She was here for a fight. Inside, the courtroom was sterile and imposing, dark wood, marble columns, the ever-present weight of authority pressing down on those who entered. Karoline took a seat at the defendant's table, setting down her leather briefcase with deliberate precision. She had barely settled when a door swung open and the judge entered, Judge Marcus Vance. A chill spread through the room. The man carried an aura of quiet ruthlessness, his neatly combed silver hair and piercing grey eyes giving nothing away. He moved with the cold efficiency of someone who had spent years bending the law to his will, his black robe as crisp as his reputation. Karoline knew of him well. A staunch enforcer of neutrality in the courtroom, Vance had made headlines before, removing nativity scenes, scolding witnesses for wearing religious symbols, and consistently ruling against cases involving faith-based freedoms. He was as predictable as he was dangerous. He adjusted his glasses, eyes locking onto Karoline like a predator studying its prey. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood. "Be seated," Vance ordered, his voice like a blade against stone. Karoline exhaled slowly, her spine straight, her gaze unwavering. Then came Eleanor Sharp. The prosecutor's heels struck, the polished floor like gunfire as she entered, a force of nature in a deep green power suit. She was infamous in legal circles, a liberal attack dog known for dismantling conservative figures with a mix of legal acrobatics and media-fueled humiliation. Karoline had watched her before, tearing through right-wing pundits, challenging religious leaders, turning their words into weapons against them. And now, Sharp was here for her. The woman took her place at the prosecution's table, setting down her own thick stack of files with the satisfaction of someone who already believed she had won. She didn't need to look at Karoline to make her presence known. Karoline smirked slightly. "Cute." Judge Vance cleared his throat. "We are here today to address the case of Karoline Leavitt versus the state. Prosecution, are you prepared?" Sharp rose, her lips curving in a practiced smile. "We are, Your Honor." "Defense?" Karoline stood, her voice steady. "Ready, Your Honor." Vance studied her for a long moment before nodding. Sharp turned, finally meeting Karoline's gaze for the first time, her expression unreadable. But Karoline knew what this was. This was never just about her. This was about power. They weren't trying to convict her of anything real. They were trying to break her, humiliate her, strip her of her credibility, and send a message to anyone watching. If you challenge the system will destroy you. Karoline settled back into her seat, her fingers lightly tapping against the wood. Let them try. Karoline sat tall in her chair as Eleanor Sharp strode to the center of the courtroom, exuding confidence. The prosecutor's emerald suit was impeccable, her expression poised, but Karoline saw through the performance. This wasn't about justice. This was about setting a trap. Sharp turned to the jury, her voice smooth and deliberate. "This case is not about faith," she said. "It is about abuse of power." She took a calculated step forward. Karoline Leavitt is not just another citizen. She is the White House press secretary, one of the most influential voices in the country. And yet, she used her position to interfere with a private institution's right to enforce its policies. By publicly defending students expelled for praying on campus, she crossed a legal boundary. She used her platform to promote a religious agenda, violating the very principle of government neutrality. Karoline kept her expression neutral, but inside she was bracing. Sharp wasn't arguing against religious freedom. She was twisting the narrative, making Karoline's defense of free speech look like an offense. Judge Marcus Vance leaned forward, his cold gaze settling on Karoline. "Miss Leavitt, would you care to respond?" Karoline stood, smoothing the front of her blazer. "Your Honor, the prosecution is misrepresenting the facts. My statement in defense of the students was an exercise of free speech, not a government directive. I did not issue a policy or take action against the university. I merely spoke." Sharp's lips curled slightly, like a cat watching a mouse walk willingly into a trap. She lifted a folder and extracted printed screenshots. Karoline's statements from a press briefing, highlighted in red. "Ah," Sharp said, feigning curiosity, "but you didn't just speak, did you? You made these remarks from the official White House podium during a nationally televised briefing. That makes this more than just an opinion. It makes it influence." Karoline's fingers curled against the wood of the defense table. "Miss Leavitt," Judge Vance said, adjusting his glasses, "do you acknowledge that your words, spoken in an official capacity, may have influenced public perception?" Karoline exhaled slowly. "I acknowledge," she said carefully, "that my words were heard, but that does not make them unlawful." Vance didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Sharp with a nod, signaling her to continue. And just like that, the game was set. When Karoline's attorney, David Callahan, attempted to submit the university's original student conduct policy, which did not explicitly ban prayer, Vance shut it down. "Denied," he said flatly. Callahan remained composed. "Your Honor, we also have multiple student testimonies confirming." "Denied!" Karoline's jaw tightened. Meanwhile, Sharp had free rein. She introduced news clips, social media reactions, and opinion pieces, all portraying Karoline's remarks as reckless, even dangerous. Every objection was brushed aside, every counter-argument dismissed. By the time court adjourned for the day, the media had its headline: "White House Press Secretary faces charges of political overreach." Karoline saw the notifications flood her phone, the push alerts, the breaking news banners. She had expected a fight. But this wasn't just a legal battle anymore. This was a public execution, and she wasn't about to let them win. Karoline sat in her dimly lit office, eyes fixed on the glowing screen of her laptop. The weight of the trial pressed against her, but she wasn't beaten. Not yet. Not ever. A single file sat open on her screen, a chain of emails. She had received them hours ago from an anonymous source, though she had a strong suspicion of who it was. The messages were between Judge Marcus Vance and an executive from a so-called non-profit advocacy group, a front for an extremist organization, with a clear mission: erase religious symbols from all public institutions. The exchange was damning. The emails detailed funding, strategic lawsuits, and pressure tactics. Vance was not just biased, he was on a payroll. He wasn't upholding neutrality. He was executing a carefully coordinated plan to strip faith from every aspect of public life. Karoline inhaled sharply. "They tried to bury me. Now I bury them." She hit send. Within minutes, the storm began. A breaking news alert flashed across the screen. Leaked emails exposed Judge Vance's connection to anti-faith lobbyists. Twitter exploded. The hashtag VanceGate trended within the hour. Conservative networks went into overdrive. Fox News: shocking revelations. Did Judge Vance conspire against religious freedom? The Daily Wire: corruption uncovered, the left's war on faith exposed. Social media posts: they tried to take down Karoline, but she just exposed the entire system. Karoline stood by the window, watching the city buzz beneath her. The trap they had set for her had collapsed in on itself. The courtroom was no longer just about her. It was about Vance, about corruption, about the deep-rooted attack on faith that had just been laid bare. By the time she arrived back in court, everything had changed. Judge Vance walked in, his usual rigid composure now stiff with tension. The room was different today. Whispers, sideways glances, reporters barely hiding their smirks. The power dynamic had shifted. Still, he wasn't ready to surrender. "This court," Vance began, his voice tight, "will not be swayed by media hysteria." Karoline sat back in her chair, crossing her legs, letting the silence stretch before speaking. "Your Honor," she said, voice smooth but cutting. "If this court values neutrality, perhaps it should start by questioning the neutrality of its own judge." A murmur rippled through the room. Vance's jaw clenched. He knew. The battle had just begun. The courtroom was suffocatingly silent as Karoline Leavitt stood, her presence commanding. The battle had raged for days, but now it was time to strike the final blow. She turned to the judge's bench, her voice steady. "Your Honor, the defense would like to call an unexpected witness." Judge Vance narrowed his eyes. "Miss Leavitt, this is highly irregular." Karoline didn't flinch. "So is corruption." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Before Vance could object, the double doors at the back of the room swung open. A man in a grey suit walked in, his expression unreadable. But Karoline saw the tension in his shoulders, the weight of a secret finally coming to light. "State your name for the court," Karoline instructed. The man stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Daniel Reed, former senior clerk for Judge Marcus Vance." The air shifted. Vance stiffened. Eleanor Sharp shot up from her seat. "Your Honor, we object to this." "Overruled," Vance barked, his voice tight. He had no choice. Refusing would make him look desperate. Karoline nodded to Reed. "Mr. Reed, you recently provided documents to an independent journalist. Would you tell the court what those documents contain?" Reed hesitated, then took a breath. "Emails, case memos, internal communications proving that Judge Vance and Prosecutor Sharp coordinated to suppress cases favoring religious plaintiffs." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Sharp's face paled. "This is a baseless—" Reed cut her off, pulling a stack of printed pages from his briefcase. "These are official court records showing repeated instances where faith-based cases were dismissed, delayed, or strategically assigned to judges with known biases." He turned toward Vance. "You didn't just ignore religious freedom. You targeted it." Vance's face turned a deep shade of red. He grabbed his gavel and slammed it down, once, twice, 3 times. "Enough! This court will not be turned into a spectacle." But it was too late. The control he had wielded was gone. The room was slipping through his fingers like sand. Karoline turned away from Vance, away from Sharp, and faced the jury. Her voice, calm and clear, cut through the noise like a blade. "If today I am convicted for defending religious freedom," she said, letting the words sink in, "then who will be next?" Silence. Not a single breath. The weight of her question hung in the air, heavier than any argument made that day. The gavel dropped limply against the bench. Vance had lost, and he knew it. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating. Every eye fixed on the judge's bench. Karoline Leavitt remained standing, her shoulders squared, her presence undeniable. Judge Marcus Vance, however, looked like a man who had just been pushed to the edge of a cliff. Then, chaos. A journalist in the gallery suddenly bolted upright, pressing a finger to his earpiece. His eyes widened, and within seconds, his phone was out, fingers flying across the screen. Karoline saw it, the unmistakable flicker of urgency. Something big had just happened. The reporter turned to his colleague, whispering rapidly. Then, another phone buzzed. Then another. The ripple effect was immediate. Within moments, murmurs filled the courtroom, growing louder with every passing second. Vance slammed his gavel down in a desperate attempt to regain control. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked. The journalist stood, voice cutting through the noise. "Your Honor, news just broke. The Federal Judicial Council has launched an emergency investigation into you." The room erupted. Gasps. Whispers, a frenzied scramble of phones capturing the moment. Karoline didn't react. She had expected this. Vance, however, paled. His fingers clenched around his gavel, his knuckles white. "This court is still in session," he snapped, but it was useless. Eleanor Sharp stiffened beside him, her mask of confidence cracking. Karoline saw it in her eyes, the realization that she was tied to a sinking ship. Sharp slowly gathered her files, straightening her blazer with a calculated movement. Then she turned to Judge Vance. "Your Honor," she said, her voice softer now, the arrogance gone, "I formally withdraw from this case." A stunned silence followed. Vance turned to her sharply. "You can't—" "I can," she interrupted, her voice clipped. "And I will." With that, she lifted her briefcase, stepped back from the prosecution's table, and walked straight out of the courtroom, leaving Vance stranded and exposed. Karoline watched her go, then turned her gaze back to the judge. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for the silver cross pinned to her collar and adjusted it, letting the light catch against its surface. Then she met Vance's eyes, sharp as a blade. He had spent his career stripping power from those he deemed weak. Now it was his turn to feel powerless. The air inside the courtroom was thick with tension. The bailiff called for order, but it was pointless. The moment had already shifted. Judge Marcus Vance sat stiffly at the bench, his jaw locked, his hands gripping the gavel like a lifeline. But even he knew this was over. A federal judge entered the room, the weight of authority pressing down with every step. He carried a single sheet of paper, which he unfolded with deliberate precision. "The court has reviewed the evidence presented and the legitimacy of these proceedings. Given recent developments, all charges against Miss Leavitt are hereby declared void and without merit." The courtroom exploded. Reporters scrambled for their phones, the gallery buzzing like a live wire. Karoline remained seated, exhaling slowly, allowing the words to settle. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore," he continued, glancing at Vance with thinly veiled disdain, "Judge Marcus Vance is hereby suspended, pending an official federal investigation into judicial misconduct." The gavel struck, a final ringing blow. Vance didn't move, didn't speak. He simply stared at the desk in front of him, his world collapsing in real time. Karoline stood, adjusting the silver cross on her collar before turning to leave. As she stepped into the hallway, her phone vibrated. Violently in her pocket, she pulled it out. Vancegate, trending #1 worldwide. Fox News, The Daily Wire, Twitter, conservative outlets and independent journalists flooded the internet with headlines. Leavitt wins, Vance falls. The White House press secretary takes down corrupt judge. The end of Vance. A judicial reckoning. Karoline smiled, slipping her phone back into her pocket. It wasn't just a victory, it was a message. The White House press briefing room was packed, the air electric with anticipation. Journalists crowded together, their cameras aimed, their fingers hovering over keyboards, waiting for the woman who had just shaken the very foundation of the judicial system. Then the doors opened. Karoline Leavitt walked in, shoulders squared, gaze unwavering. The moment she stepped behind the podium, the room fell silent. She adjusted the microphone, glanced across the sea of reporters, then spoke. "They tried to extinguish our faith." She let the words hang, watching the tension coil. Then, with the fire that had fueled her through this entire battle, she delivered the blow. But they forgot. Fire only burns brighter when it's smothered. The room erupted, flashes exploded, hands shot up, reporters shouted over one another, trying to be the first to ask the question on everyone's mind. Karoline held up a hand, commanding silence. "This isn't just about me. It's about every American who has been silenced, shamed, or punished for their beliefs. It's about ensuring that no judge, no politician, no institution ever gets to decide when and where faith is allowed." She placed both hands on the podium, voice unwavering, "And we are just getting started." Within hours, the aftershocks of her words were felt across the country. Texas, Florida, Ohio, governors from multiple conservative states announced Formal investigations into judicial overreach. Reports surfaced of past cases where religious freedoms had been suppressed, now reopened with fresh scrutiny. A reckoning for the courts. Red states moved to purge anti-faith judges. Leavitt sparks nationwide investigation. Vancegate hadn't just taken down a corrupt judge. It had ignited a movement. And as Karoline stepped off the podium, adjusting the silver cross on her collar, she knew this was only the beginning. 1 month later, Washington, D.C. was different. The city had seen scandals before, but this time something had shifted. Judge Marcus Vance, once untouchable, now stood before the cameras, his face devoid of the arrogance he once carried. The press conference was brief, his voice hollow as he spoke the words no one thought they'd hear. "I am resigning from my position effective immediately. I take full responsibility for my actions." There was no grand fight, no attempt at salvaging his name. He knew there was nothing left to save. Eleanor Sharp, once a rising star in progressive legal circles, had vanished. No statements, no appearances, just silence. The political machine that had once embraced her now treated her like a ghost, an inconvenient reminder of a war they had lost. And Karoline? She sat in her White House office, a rare moment of stillness as she sorted through the mountain of letters, emails, and messages she had received since the case ended. Then she saw it. A simple white envelope, no return address. She opened it, carefully unfolding the lined paper inside. The handwriting was slightly uneven, but every word struck deep. "Miss Leavitt, I was one of the students expelled for praying on campus. I thought my future was over. I thought no one would fight for us, but you did, and because of you, I have hope again. Thank you." Karoline exhaled, her grip tightening on the page. She looked up, her gaze falling on the silver cross pinned to her blazer. The light from her desk lamp reflected off the metal, casting a faint glow. A reminder, not just of what she had fought for, but of what she would always fight for. The White House was quiet at this hour. The city outside had settled into the stillness of the night, but Karoline Leavitt was still awake, reviewing documents under the soft glow of her desk lamp. Then her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Her instincts sharpened. Slowly, she picked it up, pressing the device to her ear. A voice, deep and deliberate, crackled through the line. "You think you've won, Leavitt?" The tone was smooth, but there was something venomous lurking beneath. "The game is only just beginning." A slow smirk curled at Karoline's lips. She didn't ask who they were. She didn't need to. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, letting the silence stretch before responding. "Good," she said, her voice steady. "I was getting bored." She ended the call, placed the phone down, and picked up the pen resting on her desk. If they thought she would back down, they hadn't been paying attention. The last battle was over. But the war had just begun.